Dismissive avoidants can be hard to read, especially after a breakup. They often go silent. They will not reach out or share their pain openly, especially during the first several weeks or months after the breakup. They may seem detached, indifferent, or even relieved, and if you've loved someone with this attachment style, it can be deeply confusing and painful to witness their coldness and wonder, did it mean anything to them at all? But here's the truth. Just because a dismissive avoidant doesn't show their pain doesn't mean they aren't feeling it. In fact, their detachment is often their coping mechanism, not a reflection of their emotional depth, but of their fear of vulnerability. Let's look more closely at 5 subtle but telling signs that a dismissive avoidant is hurting after a breakup, even if they would never admit it. Sign 1. They withdraw and retreat completely. One of the most classic signs is total withdrawal. They disappear. No texts, no social media posts, no explanations. It's as if they've hit a shutdown button and gone completely offline. This isn't necessarily about moving on quickly, it's about survival. Dismissive avoidants often cope with emotional overwhelm by detaching from the source of pain. Confronting emotional distress directly can feel threatening to their sense of control, so instead they retreat into emotional solitude, where they feel safe, even if it's lonely. It's not that they don't care, it's that feeling the depth of what the relationship meant might open emotional floodgates they don't know how to handle. Retreating is their armor. Sign 2. They indulge intensely in hobbies or work. Have you noticed them suddenly obsessed with a new fitness goal, throwing themselves into work 12 hours a day, or picking up an old hobby and becoming laser-focused on it? This is a distraction, but it's also a kind of self-soothing. For a dismissive avoidant, productivity and independence are familiar territory. These behaviors help them avoid sitting in emotional discomfort. Work, performance, and hobbies offer structure and measurable results, things that feel controllable when emotions don't. They aren't doing this just for fun or growth. It's an emotional escape. In some cases, they may even appear happier than ever. A curated version of themselves that says, look, I'm fine, but often that's a front. A deeper grief is being suppressed under the surface, and the busyness is a way of running from it. Sign 3. Very cold, flat responses. If you do happen to have contact with them, perhaps through logistics, mutual connections, or online comments, you might notice how flat their responses are. They may speak in short, clipped phrases. They might ignore emotional content. In some cases, they might even seem indifferent or passive-aggressive. This isn't because they're over you. It's because emotional connection feels threatening in the wake of a breakup. If they're still hurting but trying to stay protected, they may use coldness as a barrier to keep vulnerability out. Passive-aggressiveness is often their way of expressing pain without appearing vulnerable. They won't say, I'm hurt, but they might make a snide comment or pull away to punish you. Not out of cruelty, but out of emotional defensiveness. If you're receiving a cold wall, it's likely not because they've forgotten you. It's often because they can't handle the closeness. Sign 4. Quiet watching. They may not like your posts, they won't reach out, but that doesn't mean they're not paying attention. Dismissive avoidants often stay on the periphery of your life, checking your stories, scrolling through your photos, and checking out your social media. But it's not because they want to reconnect right away. It's because they're curious, still emotionally invested, but not ready to be exposed. They fear being vulnerable, they fear rejection, they want to know how you're doing, but without the risk of being seen. This kind of quiet watching allows them to feel connected from a safe distance. They may never admit to this behavior. In fact, they might not even realize they're doing it consciously, but it's a subtle sign that part of them is still tethered to the bond you once had. Sign 5. Indirect inquiries. Another indirect behavior. They check in about you through mutual friends. They might ask casually, how's she doing, or is he seeing anyone, without diving deeper. It's brief, but meaningful. Because this too is a strategy of distance, wanting to know without risking exposure. Dismissive avoidants are very careful about where they place emotional vulnerability. They may fear that reaching out directly would be seen as weakness or risk getting emotionally pulled back in before they're ready or ever able to process things. But if they're asking about you, it means you're still occupying space in their inner world, even if that world is protected by thick walls. So what does this mean for you? Understanding these signs is not about making excuses for someone who hurt you or justifying emotionally unavailable behavior. It's about seeing reality with clarity. Dismissive avoidants do feel. They just manage those feelings differently. Where an anxious person may seek connection to soothe their pain, a dismissive avoidant seeks distance. Where others may talk through their grief, avoidants compartmentalize. But none of these reactions make their feelings less real. The challenge is they often don't have the tools or willingness to process these feelings in relational ways. That means if you're hoping for closure, comfort, or emotional reconciliation from them, it may never come in the way you'd like. So if you're healing from a breakup with a dismissive avoidant, let this be both insight and release. Insight, because now you can see that their silence or coldness might not mean you were insignificant. Release, because you no longer need to read their actions as rejection, but as self-protection. And above all, it reminds you to focus on what you need. Your healing matters, your emotions are valid, and your growth doesn't have to wait for their acknowledgement. Because, in the end, your peace doesn't come from decoding someone else's behavior. It comes from reconnecting with your own heart, your truth, and your capacity to choose something healthier, softer, and more reciprocal next time. It's also important to recognize this. Unless a dismissive avoidant has done the inner work to address the issues that contributed to the breakup, any attempt to reconcile is likely to lead back into the same painful patterns. Without accountability for their role in the relationship's breakdown, and without a genuine commitment to healing their attachment wounds and making consistent, practical changes, the emotional distance, defensiveness, and lack of intimacy will continue to repeat in cycles. Reconnection without transformation is just repetition. If they haven't done the work, protecting your peace may mean walking away, not because there was no love, but because love alone is not enough without growth.